Welcome to Rotoviz Radio. You are listening to episode 46. My name is John Moore, and with me, in the place of Matt Friedman, is Jeremy Hart. Jeremy, how are you?
I am well, John. Thank you very much. And in Matt's place, I'd like to ensure we throw out a thank you for last show's guests. We had Matt Miller and Rumford Johnny on the show. John, I thought it was a fantastic show. Many thanks to them, and thanks for all who listened. And we'd like to give a special shout out to episode 46 of the Rotoviz Radio, the episode of Todd Christensen. John, just who is Todd Christensen?
Todd Christensen was basically the most dominant tight end that there was before this age of dominant tight ends. So in his 1983 season, his age 27 season with the Raiders, he accounted for 92 receptions, 1,247 yards, and 12 touchdowns. If we look at the all-time great tight end seasons, number one would be Rob Gronkowski's 2011. Number 2 and 3 would be Jimmy Graham's 2013 and 2011, respectively. And the fourth greatest tight end receiving season ever was Todd Christensen's 1983. So for that, I salute you, Mr. Todd Christensen. May you rest in peace. So with that, Jeremy, what are you thinking, man?
Well, I think Todd Christensen is apparently the pioneer and the trendsetter that ultimately created the hybrid position of tight ends and ultimately created the monster that is now known as Bill Belichick.
Right on. So, Jeremy, thank you for that helpful intro there. Getting into this week's episode, we've got two fantastic guests. Up first, we have Tripp Linton, who is from HOF Player. He is a sports agent who pulls back the curtain and lets us inside the world of what it's like to be a sports agent in today's NFL. Following that, we have our friend Eric Coleman from UTH Dynasty to talk about IDP rookie prospects. We're talking about defensive players. It's a fascinating segment. You want to be sure to check that one out. Let's get to it. Please welcome to the show Tripp Linton, who you can find on Twitter at Agent Linton. He's a sports agent for Hall of Fame player. Tripp, how are you?
I'm doing okay. What about yourself?
Doing great. Really excited to delve into the world of your life being a sports agent. So let's just get right to it. How did you get started in the business?
I was actually a basketball agent, and I owned my own basketball agency. And I had a friend, well, actually I had a cousin who played ball at my school. And he told me that, he didn't really like the agents that were contacting him and asked me would I get certified, and he wanted to sign with me. So I went and got certified, and my uncle told me I didn't have enough experience, so he didn't sign with me. And then the next year, one of my best friends, same situation, wanted to sign with me, and his dad told him that he needed to go with this bigger agency because I didn't have enough experience. Well, one of them got drafted, and then when he got waived, he really couldn't. His agent stopped talking to him, and my friend, who was supposed to go third, fourth round, didn't get drafted. Went undrafted, and when he didn't make the team, he couldn't get his agent on the phone. Following year, the other players, friends that I was cool with, saw these two players that we all knew go with these big agencies and basically get screwed. So they were like, I like you, I trust you, you can't do no work, so I think I'm going to sign with you. And the rest was history. That's kind of a sort of how I actually got started. Besides the fact that I applied to 22 sports agencies for football and got 28 rejection letters.
Ooh.
So even people I didn't even apply to turned me down.
Man.
So,
well, it's encouraging to see that things have changed course for you, and we're excited to hear a little bit about that tonight. So, I guess just kind of trying to imagine this sort of phase by phase, as if I were a college prospect. So take it all the way back to the beginning. Can you kind of explain to us what the process looks like for scouting players, finding guys that you might be wanting to recruit, and then ultimately building the necessary relationships so that you can ultimately sign a promising young player right after his senior year, or at least, when he declares for the draft?
There's three different ways agents find players. One way is we actually watch film and a player stands out to us and it's someone that we, think could play. The other way is the list that everyone gets of the top 200 players and we just go after those guys. And then the third way is referrals. Someone knows someone who's coming out and they want you to talk with them. So those are the three ways that most agents find players to represent. Now there's two ways that agents actually sign players. Myself, I like to build a relationship. I want to talk with you throughout the year, meet with you, see if we can even work together. If you're someone that I can trust, I don't have to worry about you getting locked up, getting in trouble, or doing anything like that. The other way is simply agents just buy players. It's really that simple. A player will say, this is what I want, and whichever agent can give it to him, that's who he's going to sign with. It's not really that much skill that's involved in that type. And it's funny, I get asked all the time, what advice would you have for me? I want to be an agent. What advice can you give me? And my number one advice is, hey, just have a lot of money. Like, that's basically it. If you want to do things the right way, then it's going to be a lot of work. But if you just want to sign players, a lot of them just take checks or marketing guarantees or things of that nature. And that's the thing that most people don't understand, and even people in the media don't really know or can even comprehend that. Case in point, there's a guy right now who's a projected first or second rounder who doesn't have an agent. The reason is he wants $250,000 up front, and most people, you're not going to get that return on your investment, because if the odds of him actually, for one, even paying you your agent fee is slim, and for two, making it to the second contract is even slimmer. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Tripp, I just wanted to comment. You mentioned some of the financial gains, of being an aspiring scout. So let's say you've signed a player, you've transitioned into that long-lasting relationship, and now you're kind of approaching the combine there. It's kind of our understanding that the agents, for example, may potentially foot the bill for the player's training leading up to and during the combine. Are you able to comment at all on that?
Yeah, most players have where they're training before they even pick an agent. You think being an agent is competitive? Try being a training facility. They start recruiting guys when they're seniors in high school, and trying to get them to commit to them by the time they get to their senior or junior year in football. So by the time we get to them, we have to talk to them about going to certain facilities to train. Some of them have been brainwashed. I hate to say it, but that's the truth. For the last 3 or 4 years, or you have to go to this particular place, you have to do this. And if the guy has any shot at all, even maybe potentially making a team, the agent is going to he's going to pay for it, because if I don't, one of the other 900 of NFLPA certified agents will. So it's kind of one of those things where, do you really need it? Do you really have to go here? Do you really have to do that? The answer is no. But if you want the player, you have to do it, because they believe that that's what they need in order for them to succeed.
Now, does the agent typically work out the player before signing him to better understand any potential physical limitations that might be present, or even if he's worth the investment at the end of the day?
No, sir. That's why we go by film. We get medical, hopefully try to get medical reports. rely on scouts that we know, just every little thing we can, the girl that he might date on campus is his roommate. We try to get in touch with them to get any information that we can to even see that if it's going to be a good investment. And you don't know. We don't know how they're gonna, be when it comes to the medicals, the psychological exams. We don't know any of that. That's the reason why we try to build a relationship to where we can have that type of relationship where he can say, hey, I'm hurt, or, hey, I need help with this, different things like that. But we don't know. The number one thing you get, a player tell you, I'm going to run a 4.3. And then he goes to the combine or pro day and he runs a 4.8 or a 4.9 or something like that. And it's your fault, of course, because you obviously was out there running with him. And so, it's all a crapshoot, and that's the one of the bad things about the business is that you just never know. Like, you never know exactly what's going to happen.
Exactly.
We have that conversation all the time. Right now, people say how many, I could tell you where maybe 12 players out of the 2,500 that are going to sign SRAs. I can tell you the 12 that are going to go in the first round. I know 12. Just if the draft was today, I can tell you 12. That's really about it. The rest of them is a crapshoot. Like the guy I was telling you about earlier that wants $200,000, $250,000. Like, is that a smart investment? No. Maybe if I wasn't an economics major, it might be, but I weigh everything, and to me, it's just not. And those are the types of things you have to put up with as well. Do I send a kid to go train, spend $20,000 on his training, when if he gets drafted in the 6th round, my gross is going to be at most 15, 16 grand, and after taxes, I'm gonna come home with maybe about 10, so I'm 10 in the red on the first year alone. Second year, he's going to make 15 after tax. I'm going to come home with about, again, 7 or 8. So maybe after the second year, going into the third year, I'm breaking even on a 6th round draft pick. And that's the finances of it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tripp. It certainly seems like the physical and even the nutritional aspects kind of get the most attention. But you're kind of alluding to, what's the return on that investment and some of the underlying issues that may arise, So how do you kind of go about dealing with any of the potential emotional and mental preparation that goes into these players that are essentially getting ready to be scrutinized by NFL scouts? For example, they're going to be going through the interview process. They may have, psych evaluations, Wonderlic tests, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you kind of weed through the noise and really get down to brass tacks there?
The same way that we prepare them physically and, with their bodies, we get them sports psychologists to teach them interview prep. We give them sample Wonderlic tests. We put them on the board. We give mock interviews, or we put 6 people in a room and everyone's screaming at them, trying to get them to answer questions and stuff like that. It's serious business. Some interview preps can charge up to $2,500 for 3 sessions. So, you prepare them mentally the same way you prepare them physically.
Got it. So we're talking with Tripp Linton, who you can find on Twitter at Agent Linton. So from your perspective, now getting through the preparation season, actually draft weekend, can you share a little bit about what that's like? Do you have a hard time getting players to be realistic about themselves, their expectations of where or if they'll be drafted? Can you share what that 72-hour window is like?
Yeah, the one thing that we do, our company, is we tell them to stay off the internet. Don't get on Twitter, don't get on Facebook, don't answer your text messages or nothing, because 95% of the stuff that they read is wrong. We then try to have a realistic expectation range of where they are going to go, with the understanding that if you're going to go after the 5th round, then you are basically a free agent. So we try to prepare them for that, and we try to have our top 3 teams together for if they do become a free agent to where they're going to sign. And the draft weekend is stressful. I mean, you're sitting there 12 hours a day, you're texting, you're emailing, you're getting calls, you're calling, trying to put your player in the best situation while everyone's calling him, asking him what's going on, and his mother's there, his girlfriend's there, and it's just stressful. You know, it's really something that I really don't think they should really have to go through. It's totally different than the guys who I know they're going to go in the top 10. You know, a guy who may go and draft in the 7th round sitting there for 3 days wondering, you know, questioning everything that he's done up to this point and questioning just everything about the whole process, what he could have done differently, better, et cetera. And it's just a very stressful thing, and we just try to keep the players calm and make sure that they understand the situation that's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then, you know, after getting drafted, you know, you start to get into some of that contract talk. Can you help me understand? I know that within the last couple of years, there's been a rookie wage scale implemented. So what are the kinds of things that an agent can still or needs to negotiate on behalf of a player? How much wiggle room is there in the wage scale? What are the other perks that you might try to work into a negotiation?
If they're going in the first round, you know, you're arguing with your guaranteed money, your offsets. Even in the second and third round, you can possibly get workout bonuses. There's a high and a low. It's not really that much difference, but you're actually trying to, you know, get as much as you can. There's going to be split languages in the contract in case of injuries and things like that. And you can also still get guaranteed contract money outside of your signing bonus. Now, where it's rare, it does happen. So you're just basically throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall to see whatever sticks. I mean, I hate to say it like that, you know, because you have a plan of what you're going to ask for. But teams hold all the leverage now when it comes to rookies. Now, when it's a free agent, it's different. But when it's a rookie, you're basically at the mercy of the team.
And Tripp, it certainly seems like a lot of these rookies are also at the mercy of having to relocate to a big city. Maybe in the past they were the head honcho at a small state school, and now they're going to be moving and making that transition into a large city and a different atmosphere altogether. So to what extent does the agency take care of that or help that with that transition process, or is there a certain amount of that the team is actually taking care of?
A lot of teams have player development guys in their cities to help the players get acclimated to the cities, help them find apartments, get utilities in their names, etc. One thing that people don't realize, and I know it's kind of sad to say, but a lot of these players have never had to do anything on their own. They might not even know how to open up a bank account or how to pay bills or things that we do every day. A lot of these players have no idea how to do that. So we take a hands-on approach to help you in your city. Do you want to buy a home? You want to get an apartment? Buy a car, lease a car. Everything that we do is tailored towards our individual. A lot of agencies, it's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is contracts, and that's it. So it's really up to the agent or the agency to decide if they're going to help the player or not. And like I said, some teams are good at it and some teams aren't. So it's basically the luck of the draw and everything coming into focus for you to have a clear picture of your future in that particular city.
Very good. So then once the player is settled in, are there any other additional opportunities, that you start to pursue, maybe endorsements, things of that nature? So, how do you ultimately help the players build their personal brand? Or is that something that it's just a little bit too soon in that process?
No, you start doing that now. Like, whether they're on their way to the combine, we're already reaching out to shoe companies, football cards, restaurant chains. If he's going to a particular city, we want to, if he's from a big city, we're doing autograph signings or commercials at car dealerships, just anything to help them start that up. And when they get to the city, they can just carry on over. But, you know, the marketing and building the brand, that's one of the most important parts to it. A lot of people hire marketing managers to just to focus on that. And, you know, it's actually kind of big, but it starts the day that you step foot in your city is when you start looking for opportunities and stuff. And you have to be ready because, you know, each class is going to bring in 7 or 8 draft picks and, you know, 3 or 4 preferred priority free agents. So you're competing against 10 other guys off the cusp to try to get that little bit of money that's even left in the city that the current pros haven't already had access to.
And then beyond the rookie year, I imagine a big part of the business is trying to figure out how to position yourself to gain new veteran clients. Do those referrals typically come through kind of word of mouth based on current guys you work with, or is there more to it than that?
You want the truth or you want the politically correct answer?
The truth.
The truth is some agents pay their players to bring them other players.
Wow.
So they might say, you know, you bring me so-and-so, I'll give you $25,000, or I won't charge you an agent fee, or I'll take half the agent fee off, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, they say, hey, player A will tell player B, hey, let's go out to lunch. And then the agent just shows up. You know, oh, hey, guys, how you doing? I just was in the neighborhood. No, you ain't. You live all the way across the country. You just happen to show up. I know this because it's happened to me. I don't have my players call me and say, you know, agent so-and-so is here and he's trying to talk to me and blah, 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 blah. Like I said, there's 900 agents. I trust maybe 8 of them, maybe.
Wow.
The other 900, I wouldn't let anywhere near anything that I'm doing.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
We won't ask for any specific names, of course.
Well, it's really not that hard to figure out, you know, once you know what you're looking for.
Right.
And if ever you want to call and we have that conversation, you give me 4 minutes of your time, and then when you're on Twitter and stuff and you see something happening, you'll be like, oh, you'll be able to put 2 and 2 together very easily.
Yeah, I can imagine. But actually, Tripp, one last question, then we'll let you go. Thank you for your time tonight. One thing I'd be curious to hear is just any players that you're excited about for this upcoming draft, who you're working with, that we can keep an eye on over the next couple months.
All of them, but
yeah, I guess just a few names for us to have on our radar.
Keep open. One guy is Ryan Dallaire from Towson. A lot of people, it amazes me how many people don't know about this kid. But, you know, he's one of the first that received a combine invite. You know, he's 6'4", 255, you know, long arms, 22 sacks over 2 years, including playing the last 2 games with a torn knee. He has surgery in December. But, you know, we'll see how he performs next week at the combine. Another one that I'm excited about is Kenny Cook from Gardner Webb. He's 6'4", 220 pounds. Great kid. He's actually a former cancer survivor. He's training right now with Chris Chambers down in Miami. I mean, you know, this kid, especially with the way Chris Matthews performed in the Super Bowl, you know, there's certain things you can't teach. And you can't teach 6'4" with an 81-inch wingspan. So those are just 2 other guys that we have this year that I'm kind of interested to see how it plays out for them. Definitely,
yeah. And actually, just a quick note on him, Kenny Cook. I was doing some research on him not that long ago. Some of the smaller school guys, and yeah, he had a couple real productive seasons up in the 30+ market share of his team's receiving yards. So interesting name there, and we'll be keeping an eye on him and the rest of your crew. Tripp, thank you so much for your time. We will be in touch.
Yes, sir. Anytime. Appreciate it.
Even if Matt can't be with us this week. He's actually here in spirit because last week we had some bonus audio that didn't make it into the episode. We went a little long with Matt Miller and Run for Johnny and therefore held it over to this week. So without further ado, here's a bonus segment talking about a few recent articles at Rotoviz. For this middle section, Matt and I want to take a few minutes to talk about a couple articles that have been up at rotoviz.com lately. And in fact, Matt is turning the tables on me and has some questions on two articles that came out recently, the first of which is visualizing the careers of 2015 NFL draft prospects. So Matt, this article just hit the site today. You had a chance to read it, and you have some stuff that you want to sort of play your dissenting Constanzin back at me. So what have you got, Matt?
Yeah, well, at least on the first article, it's not so much dissenting Costanzin, but just kind of curious about your thoughts, extended thoughts a little more on some of these players. So one of them would be kind of like Devontae Parker versus Amari Cooper. It seems like Amari Cooper is the winner, but Devontae Parker really seems to have one of those elite seasons. If you just look at the graph for Tier 1, one of those elite seasons where he's just so much higher than everyone else. What are your thoughts on their comparative production?
Sure. So in the article, I said that Amari Cooper is basically the winner of Tier 1 of the wide receivers, and the reason for that is because he had 3 seasons that plot above what wide receiver ones in the NFL were doing as college receivers. So, he certainly, I think, fills that role or can fill that role. The thing about Devontae Parker is that his last season is just so ridiculously good that it was necessary because at Louisville with Teddy Bridgewater, he was more of a touchdown guy, but he was never really that dominant in terms of like market share of yards. And that personally is the stat that I care about. But then in 6 games, he was at 57% in 2014, which is insane, and is on par with what guys like Demaryius Thomas, Eric Decker, I'm blanking on names, but I think that one pop last season after having a solid enough career is enough for me to like him as the wide receiver 2 behind Cooper. But for me, Amari is still the guy from his age and his almost unprecedented production.
Yeah, understandable. And Frank DuPont on the site, aka Fantasy Douche, he also wrote a Devontae Parker article in which he expressed a little bit of hesitancy, in part because it's a small sample size for Devontae Parker's last season. And as you mentioned, up until that point, he really hadn't done all that much in the yardage department. Let's skip tier 2. It's kind of the I don't know, it's a fairly unimpressive tier to me, but let's go to tier 3. Can you talk a little bit about Tyler Lockett? He's a guy that I've liked a lot, even though he's smaller. I think he's got some sort of hidden T.Y. Hilton, John Brown potential. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I've never really liked Tyler Lockett that much just because he's so small. But obviously, some of those guys have panned out lately, and so I'm trying to reevaluate my position on small wide receivers. But basically, Tyler Lockett, for the last 2 years, has just been phenomenal. In his age 21 season, had 45% market share yards. Age 22 had over 40% market share yards. And even though he is a smaller guy, I'm kind of starting to buy in. I wonder a little bit about how fast he'll ultimately be, which is what Hilton and John Brown have going for them. But for his career, I think he's in the top 35 all time in college wide receiver receiving yards. And ultimately, I think that he is, I'm going to really end up liking him as a small wide receiver. And that's weird for me to say. But to be clear, I don't think that he's on par with like a Brandon Cooks from last year, who I thought was probably the best small wide receiver prospect in a decade. But I think Tyler Lockett is going to be in that boat, maybe with another guy we'll talk about in a second, for best small wide receiver in this draft.
Oh, now I have to talk about that other guy. Thanks.
You don't have to. You can skip it.
I'm assuming that's Jamison Crowder?
Yeah, Jamison Crowder from Duke.
Yeah, talk about him.
Yeah, so, age 19, age 20, age 21, he was above this trend line of, what wide receiver ones were doing in college. And, even though you don't really think about Jamison Crowder as someone that's going to be like a big-time playmaker, he was phenomenal for Duke over the last couple of years. So he's a guy that, again, I'm not sure how well he's going to test. I think he's probably going to be faster than Tyler Lockett. There were great things people were saying about him at Senior Bowl. I think they polled the opposing defensive backs and said, which wide receiver has been hardest to cover this week? And they said Jamison Crowder. And so that's encouraging. But, as with Lockett, still got to see just how fast are they, and then how agile are they? Because they're not necessarily going to be win above their head kind of guys. They're going to be, on the ground in space, needing to create that underneath or over the top.
Sure. Now let's skip tier 4, although there are a couple interesting guys here, but let's go directly to tier 5. One guy that the metric seems to be pretty down on is Vince Mail. And today, actually, on Rotoviz, there's an article on Vince Mail as kind of the discount arbitrage version of Kevin White. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, when you look at Vince Mail, and Kevin White is actually a good comparison, at least in terms of the context of this article, age and production. He didn't catch a pass at Washington State until his age 22 season, which is basically means that he started his Division I college career at an older age than Amari Cooper, Jalen Strong, Devin Funchess, Devontae Parker. All these guys finished their college career. And so, with him playing his second to last season at 22 and a half and his last season, at 23 plus, that just kind of makes me a little bit nervous. And, if I'm going to roll the dice on a guy later, I would rather go in a different direction than Vince Mailey, even if he is a discount Kevin White, which I get that. I'm still not interested.
Certainly. Now, talking a little bit about your age adjusted metrics, your way of looking at these. Let's transition to your second article on the site right now. I Don't Hate Old Wide Receivers, starring Keyshawn Johnson. I have a question about some of the age adjusted perspectives that you have. So you compare kind of all 20-year-olds, all 21-year-olds, kind of based on the way that as a cohort they've performed historically. What are your thoughts on kind of like the different experiences that some of these guys have had? So, for instance, there are some true freshmen who are 20 years old, and there are some redshirt sophomores that are 20 years old, and some true juniors that are 20 years old, and their experience level kind of differs. The amount of time they've been competing in actual games differs. What are your thoughts on that, or how to incorporate that into the metric?
Well, the way that I think about it is that for me, elite wide receivers are the best long-term fantasy football dynasty assets, right? And so if we generally understand that the peak of an NFL wide receiver is, let's say, 27, 28, obviously guys can be good well beyond that, but let's just say that that's, roughly the prime years. I would just rather get the guys as young and accomplished as possible. So, for example, like Amari Cooper finished his college career at, age 20 and a half. So that means that he's got 6 or 7 NFL seasons until he reaches his peak. Whereas a guy like, Mailey or Kevin White has 4 or 5. And that's maybe not a huge deal, but I think that, when we're trying to split hairs, which we are, and when we're trying to find the most long-term upside, I want the guys, like Amari or like an Allen Robinson or like a Sammy Watkins, DeAndre Hopkins, who were just really good for their 18, 19, 20 ages of their college careers and then, are in the NFL as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. Understandable. So actually, here's a question. You had looked at some guys who were a little bit older, like Marvin Harrison, Joey Galloway. Now, I see that Joey Galloway had a good junior season when I believe he was 22, and then regressed a little bit in his final season, at least in comparison to other 23-year-olds. Have you, where's your research going? Have you found anything that would suggest that a guy who does well his junior year but regresses a little his senior year can still have success in the NFL, or is the final season the one that seems to be the most important?
Yeah, that's actually the next direction that I'm going with my research. So last year, I wrote a lot about final season age-adjusted score and why that's important in predicting NFL success, which it is. But I'm wondering, and I'll hat tip to Sean Siegel, who wrote about breakout age for wide receivers. And since then, I've basically built a database of thousands of receiver seasons that each have a score. So not just last season, but every season. And I'm trying to figure out if last season matters more or if peak breakout season matters more. So for example, as you mentioned, Joey Galloway was much better at age 22 than he was at age 23. Which of those is more significant? Slight lean, without having the numbers tested out yet, slight lean towards breakout age mattering more, so long as they're still decent, in that final season or those final 2 seasons. But yeah, more to come on that.
Right. And one quick kind of follow-up on this. It's intriguing the ways in which certain positions might differ. So I think we've all seen wide receivers who have been studly earlier and then kind of dropped off a little bit, like Alshon Jeffrey, and then, went on to have a really solid early part of his NFL career. I think it's probably different for guys like quarterbacks. We really haven't seen guys who have had regression in their final college, noticeable regression in their final college season, who have done well in the NFL. Normally for the quarterback position, it seems like guys need to peak before they enter the NFL. But contrarily, the running back position, I don't really think it matters if a guy is at his best right before he enters the NFL. I think it's just a question of what kind of workhorse potential did he show in his best season? And then that is, I think, in general, what kind of extrapolates to the NFL.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. I think for the non-quarterback offensive players that we're talking about, I think just peak matters. Just flash that talent 1 year, and then maybe there's an injury, maybe it's a coaching change, maybe whatever. But for quarterbacks, I think about like a Christian Ponder is the first name that comes to my mind, who was just notably better in his junior year than he was in his senior year. And I think it really is kind of that last push that makes the difference. So, Matt, do you have any final comments before we wrap up?
No, let's get going.
Great. Please welcome to the show Eric Coleman, who you can find on Twitter at UtahEC. He is an engineer by day and a fantasy football writer for UTH Dynasty by night. Eric, how are you?
Good, doing great. Excited to be on the podcast, man.
Absolutely, and we're really excited to have you. It's kind of a fun story, dated back to last summer when us and Matt were shooting some emails back and forth about getting started, and it's exciting to see the progress that you've made and some of the work you've been doing over there. So, I guess just jumping right into it, you contribute a lot of individual defensive player IDP content over at UTH Dynasty. Can you share your story as to how you got into that format, and why is it your preference to include defensive players?
Yeah, I actually only got involved in it roughly 2 years ago, which is kind of short. I've been doing fantasy for over 10, but got a buddy asked me to play IDP, and I said okay. And I had to jump in the only way I know how, which is slinging spreadsheets. So, got all the mock draftable data, all the FF Today, all the stats, filled stuff in from NFL Draft Scouts, looked at the depth charts from our lads, and then just kind of jumped in with both feet. As far as UTH, they had a writing contest roughly a year ago. So I kind of jumped in on that, and I said, hey, a lot of people are doing interesting things on the offensive side of the ball. What can we do on the defensive side, with agility-adjusted, weight-adjusted agility and those type of stats. So I kind of dug into that, and that's kind of where I found my home.
Awesome. And speaking of that, you've recently organized a few IDP mock drafts. What can you tell us about how those went? Were there any surprises for you?
Yeah, they were really fun. Got a bunch of the IDP heads from the community together. We kind of got a couple mock drafts in. One interesting thing is we had 9 linebackers go in the first round. That was pretty crazy. But I think that speaks to this draft class. I think it's a really, if the offensive side of the ball is running backs, if that's a running back class, I'd say the defensive side of the ball, we have an edge rusher class. So that's pretty exciting. We only had 1 DB go in the first round, Landon Collins, who you'd probably expect, almost a generational talent. and only one cornerback go way late, Marcus Peters, who has, he's just dripping in talent as well. One other interesting thing, by the time we got to pick 18, everyone was putting comments like, this is a flyer, this is a stab in the dark. I mean, it's just kind of how much data we don't have until the combine. So we're just kind of all watching film and trying to figure out what's going on. Do the stats correlate? Those type of things.
Eric, you are officially the third UTH Dynasty member to make an appearance on the Rotoviz podcast here. So you're in good company, and certainly a great relationship there. So pleasure to speak with you here. So let's take a step back at a holistic level when it comes to the draft here. When you look at defensive players, what are some of the on-field numbers and some of the workout drills that you think are most important as you're kind of prospecting the various positions?
Yeah, being an engineer, I'm most comfortable in the numbers by far. But this time of year we do a lot of film work. One correlation I found when I was first digging in is with safeties. How do we hook the combine numbers to what they do? How do we find guys that score year after year? Most people stream the defensive backs. They don't care too much about them. So I wanted to dig in hard there. Actually found a pretty strong correlation that BMI adjusted speed, explosiveness, which is the 20-yard shuttle and the 3-cone, and draft position in there, actually gave us a really strong correlation to who are those top players: Bob Sanders, Ronnie Lotz, Eric Berry, those type of guys that just score well year after year with the high tackle numbers. So, and it kind of makes sense when you break it down. I mean, how much kinetic energy are these guys delivering, per square inch of their body? So it kind of makes sense. You guys had a metric guy on earlier in the summer that talked about overfit models, and I think some of my models are actually overfit. So that's something I'm working on in the off season here, is trying to get those correlations better. As far as the edge rushers, BMI doesn't matter as much. It's more it's more about weight and speed and explosiveness. So I like those numbers a lot. As far as the on-field metrics, you got to look at the numbers are hard to correlate sometimes. You got to look at the film and see if that makes sense. Landon Collins, 80-plus tackles, makes a lot of sense and looks good on tape. Jared Holloman out of Louisville, he's a safety. He had 14 interceptions this year, but you click on the tape, and it looks like he's just in the right place at the right time. There's a specific play where he picks off Jameis Winston, and he's behind the receiver and probably 2 or 3 yards short, and he gets the pick. So you really got to just correlate those numbers and see if they make sense.
Very interesting stuff there, Eric. And I know you kind of alluded to it here, but if you had a magic wand and maybe additional access to new and better and innovative ways to look at IDP data, what are some of the things you would want to have access to that you just don't have right now, or maybe there's room for growth in the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we have a problem in the IDP format in the fact that sometimes it's more about opportunity than it is about skill, and we really want it to be more about skill. Two stats that I think are underutilized, to be honest, but are out there. They're on MFL, they're on Yahoo. Passes defensed. Like Vontae Davis is a great defensive back, but he only had 35 tackles, but he had 20 points or 20 passes defense. So that should be 20 extra points he gets, if you're doing 1 point there. So that can buff up the cornerbacks. And then tackles for a loss. Not everybody utilizes that. And that can buff up the defensive tackles when they get good penetration. So those are 2 stats to help. As far as new stats, I think QB hit and QB hurried are good for outside linebackers to get their stats up a little bit. That data is available. It's on most websites, but it's not on MFL. It's not on most of our fantasy sites. I think missed tackles could help a lot. That could help kind of put a shade on the opportunity a little bit, that it's not just opportunity-based, it's skill-based if we put a negative point associated with that. And then the final thing is throws attempted versus receptions. We have that data on defensive backs. Once again, you can find that data a good bit of places, but it's not found on the fantasy sites at all. So that would be a nice one to add a half point or quarter point to buff up the cornerbacks.
So we're talking with Eric Coleman, who you can find on Twitter at UtahEC. So transitioning into some specific players for the upcoming draft, one guy expected to shine at the Combine is Washington's do-it-all player, Shaq Thompson. In what round do you think he's going to be drafted? What position should he play? Kind of went both ways to an extent in college. And ultimately, what's your verdict or thought on him as an IDP option?
Yeah, he's definitely an exciting player. There's a ton of buzz about him. I think he's definitely going the first round. I don't think I've seen him mocked outside the first round. Normally he goes in the teens somewhere, depending on what you're looking at. I think he's going to be highly dependent on the combine. He's only 6'1", 220, which is a great size for a safety, but kind of small for an outside linebacker. He looked good as a running back, 456 yards, 7.5 yards per carry. Pretty impressive, but some of those were some seriously long runs. So I think we need to take that with a grain of salt. I think he'll end up on the defensive side of the ball, probably a little bit of a gadget player on the offensive side of the ball. My guess is an outside rush linebacker, unless we have a few teams, licking their chops for a Cam Chancellor like lookalike. He's a little bit smaller, but I suspect he's faster than Cam. So I think that's what we'll see. Odds are high on outside linebacker, but we could see a safety.
Interesting. And then, up at the line of scrimmage or closer to it, kind of the top two guys there are USC's Leonard Williams, Nebraska's Randy Gregory. Who are you higher on of those two, and how do you think they project as IDP players?
Leonard Williams, I think, is a slam dunk. It's really hard to find negative information on Leonard Williams right now. 80 tackles, 7 sacks. He's 6'5", 290. People are projecting him in the 4.8 range. I think he's a 3-4 defensive end. I've seen him mocked to the Titans at number 2. That makes sense, even though the Titans are pretty solid right now at defensive end. Al Woods, the nose tackle, actually graded negatively at PFF, so maybe they move somebody in and keep Williams on the outside. He's going to be great in IDP. I think he'll be a top pick in our mocks. Normally, I grab him around the 4th pick. He could probably move up to the 1st pick. Randy Gregory is a little more interesting. He's an interesting size at 6'6", 245. There's definitely some haters out there. Some people call him the first round bust. I've heard him say not a top 100 player, things all over the board like that. But he's normally mocked within the first 10 picks. He's impressive to me. The only thing he kind of doesn't show is sometimes some strength. There's a specific play versus USC where the offensive tackle's actually blocking him while hopping on one foot, which kind of says some bad things about his strength. But he has incredible moves. He tends to hold the tackle at distance with his long arms and just break that block and kind of cut in whenever he feels like it, or just wait on the running back if it's a running play, break the block, and then hit him. So I like him a lot. Some other players like him, Dante Fowler is pretty impressive, and so is Alvin Bud Dupree. So those are 2 other names to keep track of there.
Very great IDP nuggets there. It seems like a lot of the focus on IDP, Eric, really comes down to the set, right? So in your opinion, what type of IDP player do you think is the most valuable? Is it the linemen, and particularly the edge rushers who acquire sacks often, like the J.J. Watts of the world, or is it the linebackers who rack up a lot of tackles, like the Luke Kuechly's of the world?
So the cop-out answer to that is depends on scoring format. If you have a big play league, which we consider if you score more than 4 points per sack, the outside linebackers start to hold more value. If you're a heavy tackle league, we look at that sack to tackle ratio. If it's 1 point for tackle and less than 4 points per sacks, the inside linebackers are kind of the holy grail there. So I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but it really depends on scoring format. But most people build their teams around linebackers, and even in the big play formats, unless you go crazy, inside linebackers are still kind of top player.
Very cool. So then, in your opinion, what's your favorite scoring format to partake in an IDP, and why?
Oh, that's a great question. I think in 2011, PFF put out their house scoring rules, and I'm a real big fan of them. It's like, I think it's 1 point per sack, 1 point per tackle, 4 points per sack. They give a point for passes defensed, 3 points for a tackle for a loss. I find it a really good mix of big play and tackle, and that's really what I like a lot, and I advocate. So.
Can you talk a little bit about the distinction between inside and outside linebackers, and is there any impact on these positions based on whether they play in a 3-4 or a 4-3 type of system?
Yeah, totally. Just because, like we said earlier, that opportunity sometimes has a lot more to do than skill. I guess I'll track tackle heavy format first. In tackle heavy, a 4-3 middle linebacker is the holy grail. You have four defensive linemen, sorry, soaking up all the blocks, and you kind of got the center fielder and the middle linebacker getting all the tackles. Next in line is kind of the 3-4 with a weak inside linebacker. A good example of this is the Niners. They have Alden Smith, who's an outside linebacker, but often he creeps up to the line, and it looks like a 4-3. So that kind of turns Patrick Willis into a middle linebacker more than an inside linebacker. That's why he's kind of done so well. And you got to be on the lookout for teams like that are 3-4, but one outside linebacker creeps up. In the other formats, obviously outside linebackers that blitz the quarterback get a lot of format, or a good format jump there. Mostly the weak side, because the strong side is often in coverage versus the tight end.
Got it. And then transitioning to the secondary, you mentioned Landon Collins earlier, but who are some of the other guys, safety, cornerback position, that you're most excited about?
As far as safety, Deron Smith from Fresno State, he's pretty impressive. He's got a great BMI at 5'10", almost 200 pounds, racked up 87 tackles, 7 passes broken up. He's probably the only one even close to the conversation with Collins. And then it really drops off after that. The other guy worth mentioning is Anthony Harris. And I kind of ripped him in my first column because I wasn't super impressed by him. And I sat down, watched some more film, and I gotta take that back. He has a great football IQ. He might not be the fastest guy out there, but he makes great reads. He has great tackling form. I think if he has a good combine, he could really crank up the draft boards. As far as cornerbacks, Trey Waynes from Michigan State and Marcus Peters from Washington are considered the top two. Trey Waynes is a little more polished. He's a cleaner guy. His big thing against him is he's 6'1", 182. Everyone thinks he's a little thin, but he looks good in man coverage, looks good in zone. Marcus Peters has a few off-field issues, but he's just dripping in talent. The only thing people can say bad about him right now is off-field talent or off-field issues, and they say he has sloppy footwork, but he has so much talent he can make up for it. So,
got it. And then one last question, then we will let you go. Thanks again, Eric. This has been enjoyable. Who are some of the other people out there that produce IDP content that you enjoy reading and would suggest that others should check out as well?
Yeah, there's some great guys out there. It's sometimes tough to find IDP content because it's just the lesser format. One guy is Andrew Parsons, who does just film breakdown. He's not specifically a defensive guy, but if you want to look at film breakdown, he's a great guy to look at. Matt Miller, who you had on last week, NFL draft scout. He does great draft information. Once again, it's not IDP focused, but that's great information. And then as far as the IDP guys, Daniel Simpkins over at UTH with me, he holds down kind of the veteran content, and I hold down the rookie content. X Fantasy Phoenix is his Twitter handle. Project Roto 700 Ben from Fantasy 5-Star. He's holding down some great content. Over there at Rotoviz with you guys, Eric Braun. I love talking with that guy. We hit up on Twitter a lot. He's been in the mocks a good bit. And then the whole DLF squad, they're great. Big Board IDP, Eric Olinger, Gary Davenport, FF Ghost, all those guys are great. So good content there.
Awesome. Thank you for those shout outs, Eric. We will be in touch. Take care.
Thanks, man. Bye.